The communication arrays across the Nexus station fell silent one by one, like dying stars blinking out of existence. Ambassador Crixtal felt his chitinous exoskeleton tighten with each lost signal. In his 40 years of diplomatic service, he had never witnessed such universal terror spread across the galactic community. "Another sector has gone dark," reported his aide, her tentacles trembling as she manipulated the holographic display. The three-dimensional map of known space showed vast swaths of red where thriving civilizations had simply stopped transmitting. Not destroyed, not conquered, just silent. The Grimspawn were coming. Crixtal had heard whispers of them in the deepest corners of the galaxy, stories told by traders who claimed to have seen the aftermath of their passage. Entire star systems stripped of resources, planets cracked open like eggs, and not a single living soul left behind. But these were always dismissed as spacer tales, the kind of stories that grew more terrifying with each retelling. Now those stories were becoming reality. The Viridian High Council had been the first major power to issue a formal evacuation order. The warrior race that had conquered 17 systems in the last century had packed up their entire fleet and fled toward the galactic rim. When the Viridians ran, everyone else paid attention. Next came the Crystalline Confederation, their silicon-based forms naturally resistant to most conventional weapons. They had lasted 3 days longer than anyone expected before their harmonic screams echoed across subspace frequencies. Then silence. The Nexus station itself represented the last hope of organized resistance. Built at the intersection of 7 major hyperspace routes, it housed the greatest military minds from 43 different species. If anyone could devise a strategy to stop the Grimspawn, it would be here. But strategy required understanding your enemy, and the Grimspawn remained a mystery. "Sir," the aide's voice dropped to a whisper, "we're receiving a transmission from the outer sensor grid." The main display flickered to life, showing grainy footage from a long-range observation post. Against the starfield backdrop, dark shapes moved with predatory grace. The ships, if they could be called ships, defied conventional design. They looked like living things, all curves and organic protrusions, pulsing with an inner light that hurt to look at directly. "How many?" Crixtal asked. "Sensors are having difficulty. The hulls seem to absorb most scanning attempts. Conservative estimate puts the fleet at over 10,000 vessels." 10,000. The largest armada ever assembled by the Galactic Defense Force numbered fewer than 3,000 ships, and that had taken decades to coordinate between the member species. As they watched, one of the Grimspawn vessels extended what looked like a feeding tube toward a massive asteroid. Within minutes, the rock simply ceased to exist, consumed entirely. The alien ship grew slightly larger, its hull rippling with new growth. "They're not just destroying everything," Crixtal realized with growing horror. "They're eating it." The transmission cut to static as the sensor post itself was consumed. In the following hours, refugees began arriving at Nexus Station in increasing numbers. Each wave brought new reports of the Grimspawn's advance. They moved like a plague, consuming everything in their path. Planets, moons, space stations, even the stellar matter itself. Nothing was spared. The Thoraxian representative, General Vex Thule, paced the command center on his 6 armored legs. His species had evolved from apex predators on a death world where everything tried to kill everything else. They knew warfare in ways most species could barely comprehend. "We need to stop thinking of this as a conventional invasion," he growled, mandibles clicking in agitation. "This is an extinction event. They're not trying to conquer us. They're trying to digest us." "But what do they want?" asked Dr. Zafira, the Etherian scientist whose gaseous form shimmered with anxiety. "Every intelligence we've encountered has had goals, motivations we could understand, even if we disagreed with them." "Maybe understanding is the wrong approach," Vex Thule replied. You don't negotiate with a virus. The debate continued for hours, with representatives from dozens of species offering theories, strategies, and increasingly desperate plans. Some suggested hiding in the void between galaxies. Others proposed a scorched Earth policy, destroying their own worlds before the Grimspawn could consume them. A few even suggested surrender, though no one was sure how to surrender to something that seemed incapable of communication. As the discussions grew more heated, a junior technician from the communications array burst into the chamber. His fur was standing on end, and his large eyes were wide with something beyond fear. "Sirs, we're receiving a transmission, but not from the Grimspawn." The chamber fell silent. "Then who?" Krixtal demanded. It's from a species we've never encountered before. They're requesting permission to dock. They say—" The technician paused, checking his notes again as if he couldn't believe what he was reading. "They say they're here about the Grimspawn problem." The main display activated, showing a vessel unlike anything in the galactic database. It was clearly artificial, built rather than grown, but the design was strange, all angles and hard edges where most species favored curves and organic shapes. It looked almost primitive compared to the flowing forms they were used to. "This is Captain Sarah Chen of the Earth Vessel Determination," came a voice through the communicators. The universal translators struggled with the language patterns. "We understand you're having some trouble with an invasive species. We'd like to help." Earth. None of them had heard of it. "How did they even find us?" whispered the Etherean scientist. More importantly, General Vexthul's voice carried a note of suspicion. "How do they know about the Grimspawn? And why aren't they running like everyone else?" The human captain's next words chilled them more than any Grimspawn threat. "Permission to dock, Station Commander. We need to discuss the situation with whoever's in charge. Time is running short, and the Grimspawn have accelerated their timeline. They know we're coming." Krixtal felt his exoskeleton crack under the strain of his tensing muscles. The Grimspawn knew these humans were coming. What kind of species advertised their approach to an unstoppable devouring force? "Grant them docking permission," he ordered, though every instinct screamed against it. "Bay 7, full security protocol." "Sir, are you sure?" his aide asked. "We don't know anything about them." "No," Krixtal replied, watching the strange angular ship maneuver toward their station with unsettling precision. "But I have a feeling we're about to learn." As the human vessel settled into the docking bay, Krixtal noticed something that made his blood run cold. Along the ship's hull, he could make out scoring and burn marks, battle damage. These humans hadn't just encountered the Grimspawn, they'd fought them. And somehow, they'd survived. The docking bay sealed, and atmospheric readings confirmed the humans breathed a standard oxygen-nitrogen mixture. Within minutes, the airlock cycled, and 3 figures emerged. They moved with a predatory confidence that reminded Vexthul of his own species, but there was something else, a calmness that spoke of beings who had looked into the abyss and hadn't blinked. The leader was obviously the captain, a female by the species' apparent dimorphic nature. She was smaller than most of the assembled delegates, but something in her bearing made her seem to fill the entire bay. Her companions flanked her, both carrying weapons that looked disturbingly functional. "Captain Chen," Krixtal stepped forward, his translator working to modulate his voice to their frequency. "Welcome to Nexus Station. I'm Ambassador Krixtal. We're curious about your arrival." The human captain smiled, an expression that showed teeth in a way that most species would interpret as threatening. "Ambassador, thank you for the welcome. I'm afraid we don't have much time for formal introductions. The Grimspawn will be here in approximately 18 hours. "How can you possibly know that?" Dr. Zephyr's gaseous form rippled with agitation. "Because we've been tracking them for 6 months," Captain Chen replied simply. "They consumed our outer colonies first. Took us a while to figure out what we were dealing with." Her expression hardened. We're still figuring it out, actually. But we've learned a few things along the way. General Vex Thule stepped forward, his predatory instincts responding to something in the human's posture. You fought them before. Fought them, studied them, learned their patterns. Chen gestured to her ship through the transparent bay doors. The determination has been through 7 engagement cycles. We are one of the few vessels to survive multiple encounters. How? The question came from a dozen different species simultaneously. Captain Chen's smile grew wider, and this time there was definitely something predatory in it. Because we figured out something everyone else missed. The Grimspawn aren't unbeatable. They're just really, really good at making you think they are. She paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. Tell me, when they attack, what do they target first? Everything, Krixtal replied. They consume everything. No, Chen shook her head. They target your command and control systems first. Your communication networks, your coordination centers. They want you isolated, scared, unable to work together. Because when you can't coordinate, you can't mount an effective defense. Dr. Zephyr's form brightened with sudden understanding. They're not just consumers, they're tacticians. Exactly, and they have one major weakness. Captain Chen paused for dramatic effect. They've never encountered a species that considers overwhelming odds to be a fun challenge. The silence that followed was broken by General Vex Thule's rumbling laugh. You're insane. Probably, Chen agreed cheerfully. But we're also still alive, which is more than most species can say after meeting the Grimspawn. Now, who's ready to hear our plan? As the humans began outlining their strategy, Krixtal felt something he hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. It was a small flame, barely flickering, but it was there. These strange beings with their angular ships and predatory smiles had fought the unstoppable force and lived to tell about it. Maybe, just maybe, the galaxy wasn't doomed after all. But as he listened to the human plan unfold, Krixtal began to understand why even the Grimspawn might have reason to fear. The humans weren't planning to run, hide, or even fight a defensive action. They were planning to hunt. The war room aboard Nexus Station had been transformed into something resembling organized chaos. Holographic displays showed star charts, fleet positions, and tactical simulations that changed by the minute. The assembled representatives from 43 species watched in fascination and growing unease as the humans methodically dissected everything they thought they knew about warfare. Captain Chen stood at the center of it all, her movements precise and economical as she manipulated the tactical displays. Her 2 companions, Commander Torres and Lieutenant Kim, worked at separate stations, their fingers dancing over alien interfaces they'd somehow mastered in mere hours. The key to understanding the Grimspawn, Chen explained, highlighting a series of battle recordings, is recognizing that they're not actually as unified as they appear. Watch their attack patterns. The display showed the consumption of the Viridian homeworld. At first glance, it looked like a coordinated assault, thousands of bioships descending like a swarm of locusts. But as the humans adjusted the playback speed and highlighted individual vessel movements, patterns emerged. See that? Torres pointed to a cluster of ships on the display's edge. Those vessels are feeding independently. They're not sharing resources with the main swarm. Competition, Kim added, his voice carrying the excitement of discovery. They're competing with each other for the best feeding positions. Dr. Zephyr's gaseous form shimmered with sudden understanding. They're not a hive mind at all. They're individual predators that happen to hunt in packs. Exactly, Chen nodded approvingly. Which means they have all the weaknesses that come with pack behavior. Hierarchy disputes, resource competition, and most importantly, they can be turned against each other. General Vex Thule's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. You're suggesting we make them fight each other instead of us? Among other things. Chen smiled that predatory smile again. But first, we need to address the elephant in the room. She gestured to the tactical display, which now showed the approaching Grimspawn fleet in real time. The bioships moved through space like living things, their hulls pulsing with organic rhythms that made them difficult to track with conventional sensors. "Your current defensive strategies are all wrong," Chen said bluntly. "You're trying to fight them like they're a conventional military force. Establish defensive perimeters, protect key installations, minimize casualties. That's exactly what they're counting on." Ambassador Crickstall felt his exoskeleton tighten again. "What would you suggest instead?" "We stop playing defense," Torres answered, bringing up a new set of displays. "The Grimspawn are hunters. They think like hunters. So we become something they've never encountered before." "Which is?" asked the Thoraxian general. "Prey that hunts back," Kim replied. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Several species began talking at once, their translators creating a cacophony of objections, questions, and expressions of disbelief. Chen waited for the noise to die down before continuing. "I know it sounds insane. We've been running the numbers for months, and statistically, this plan has a 73% chance of getting us all killed." "That's supposed to be encouraging." Dr. Zephyra's form flickered with what might have been nervous laughter. "Compared to the current success rate against the Grimspawn?" Torres pulled up casualty reports from the past 6 months. 0% survival for static defensive positions. This is actually a significant improvement. Commander Torres stepped forward, her expression serious. "Here's what we know about Grimspawn psychology. They're apex predators who've never encountered meaningful resistance. Every species they've consumed has followed the same pattern. Panic, retreat, establish defenses, get overwhelmed. They expect this behavior because it's all they've ever seen." "But humans," Kim continued, "we evolved alongside other apex predators. We know how to fight things bigger and stronger than us because we've been doing it for hundreds of thousands of years." Chen activated a new display showing Earth's ecosystem. "On our homeworld, we weren't the strongest, fastest, or most heavily armed species, but we were the most adaptable. When something tried to eat us, we figured out how to eat it back." The hologram showed various Earth predators, sharks, bears, big cats, alongside primitive humans. "We turned every apex predator on our planet into either livestock or extinct species, not through superior firepower, but through superior thinking." "The Grimspawn think they're at the top of the food chain," Torres added. "We're going to teach them they're wrong." General Vex Thule leaned forward, his predatory interest clearly piqued. "Explain this plan of yours." Chen's smile grew wider. "Phase 1. We let them attack Nexus Station." The room erupted again, but Chen raised her voice over the protests. "Let me finish. We let them attack, but we don't defend the way they expect. Instead of trying to protect the station, we use it as bait." The tactical display showed Nexus Station surrounded by hidden ship positions. "We've spent the last 6 hours analyzing your defensive capabilities. Individually, each species' ships are impressive but insufficient. However, if we combine them properly..." Torres took over, her fingers dancing across the controls. "The Crystalline Confederation ships have the best shielding technology we've ever seen. The Viridian vessels pack more firepower per ton than should be physically possible. The Etherian ships can phase in and out of normal space. The Thoraxian ships are mobile fortresses." "Separately, they're all inadequate," Kim continued. "But if we integrate their systems, create hybrid battle groups where each ship type covers the other's weaknesses..." "We get something the Grimspawn have never seen before," Chen finished. "A coordinated multi-species fleet that's greater than the sum of its parts." Dr. Zephyra's form rippled thoughtfully. "But the Grimspawn still outnumber us by orders of magnitude." Numbers don't matter if you can control the battlefield, Torres replied. Phase 2 involves something we call aggressive repositioning. The display showed the space around Nexus Station, but now it was filled with hidden weapon platforms, minefields that looked like asteroids, and concealed ship positions throughout the system. We turned the entire system into a trap, Chen explained. But not the kind they're expecting. Instead of trying to stop them from feeding, we're going to make them want to feed in specific places. Poison bait, General Vexthul realized, his mandibles clicking with appreciation. Exactly. We seed certain areas with materials that will make them sick, slow them down, or better yet, make them aggressive toward each other. Kim brought up chemical analysis charts. Human biochemists are really good at creating compounds that mess with biological systems. You're going to drug them, Ambassador Krikstal stated, not sure whether to be impressed or horrified. Among other things, Chen nodded. But Phase 3 is where it gets really interesting. The display changed again, showing long-range projections of Grimspawn movement patterns. The beauty of pack hunters is that they have established territories. The Grimspawn aren't just randomly consuming everything, they're expanding their feeding grounds in a specific pattern. Torres highlighted several star systems. We've identified their likely next targets after they finish here. Instead of waiting for them to attack those systems individually, we're going to be waiting for them, Kim finished. Not defending, Chen clarified. Hunting. We're going to follow them from system to system, hitting them when they're most vulnerable, while they're feeding. Dr. Zafira's form brightened with sudden understanding. You're going to turn their own feeding behavior against them. When pack predators are feeding, they're at their most vulnerable, Torres explained. They're focused on the food, their guard is down, and they're often competing with each other for the best portions. That's when you strike, General Vexthul growled approvingly. Hit them when they least expect it. Chen nodded. But here's the real genius of the plan. We're not trying to destroy their entire fleet. We're trying to teach them that hunting in this part of the galaxy is more trouble than it's worth. Conditioning, Kim added. Every time they try to feed here, we make it painful and expensive. Eventually, they'll move on to easier prey. You're going to train them like animals, Ambassador Krikstal realized. Exactly, Chen smiled. Except the training tool is coordinated military strikes instead of food rewards. Commander Torres brought up another display showing resource calculations. The best part is that this strategy actually gets stronger over time. Every engagement teaches us more about their behavior patterns, and every victory brings new allies to our fleet. Speaking of which, Chen looked around the room. We're going to need volunteers. This isn't going to work if everyone runs away the moment things get dangerous. The silence that followed was heavy with consideration. These beings represented species that had survived and thrived in a dangerous galaxy. But what the humans were proposing went against every instinct that had kept them alive. Finally, General Vexthul stood to his full height. The Thoraxian military will volunteer our ships and crews. We came from a world where everything tried to kill us. These Grimspawn are just another predator that needs to learn its place. Dr. Zephyra's gaseous form swirled with decision. The Etherian Science Collective will provide our phase shift technology and our most advanced sensor arrays. One by one, the other representatives stepped forward. The Crystalline Confederation offered their shielding technology. The Viridians provided their massive weapons. Even species that had been preparing to flee reconsidered their positions. Excellent, Chen nodded with satisfaction. Now let's talk about the fun part. How we're going to convince a fleet of biomechanical space monsters that they've just made the worst mistake of their evolutionary history. Ambassador Krikstal watched the humans work with their new allies, coordinating technologies and tactics that should have been impossible to integrate. But somehow, the humans made it look easy. They approached the problem like engineers rather than warriors, treating the Grimspawn threat as a technical challenge to be solved rather than an unstoppable force to be feared. As the hours passed and the plan took shape, Krixtal began to understand what made these humans so dangerous. They didn't see obstacles, they saw opportunities. They didn't fear superior numbers or technology. They figured out ways to turn those advantages into weaknesses. But most importantly, they didn't fight to survive. They fought to win. And as the Grimspawn fleet drew closer to Nexus Station, Krixtal found himself almost feeling sorry for them. They had no idea what they were about to encounter. For the first time in galactic history, an apex predator was about to discover what it felt like to be prey. The Grimspawn arrived exactly when Captain Chen predicted they would. Ambassador Krixtal watched from the command center as thousands of bioships materialized from hyperspace, their organic hulls pulsing with an inner light that made the void around them seem to writhe with malevolent life. Each vessel was unique, evolved for specific functions within their terrible ecosystem, but all shared the same predatory grace that had terrorized the galaxy for months. "Contact in 30 seconds, reported Commander Torres from her position at the tactical station. Around her, representatives from 43 species worked alongside human technicians, their combined expertise creating something that had never existed before, a truly unified defense force. "All ships report ready," added Lieutenant Kim. "Phase 1 is a go." Captain Chen stood at the center of it all, her calm presence somehow making the impossible seem routine. "Remember, people, we're not trying to win this battle, we're trying to start a conversation." The lead Grimspawn vessel was massive, easily 10 times the size of Nexus Station itself. As it approached, feeding tubes began extending from its hull, reaching toward the station like the tentacles of some cosmic octopus. "Here we go," Chen murmured. The first feeding tube made contact with the station's outer hull and immediately began the consumption process. Metal, plastic, and ceramic dissolved under the alien secretions, flowing into the bioship like liquid nutrients. But instead of the expected screams and panic, the Grimspawn encountered something unprecedented. Their prey was fighting back in a way they'd never experienced. "Phase 1, execute," Chen ordered. Hidden weapon emplacements throughout the station activated simultaneously, but instead of firing at the Grimspawn ships, they targeted the feeding tubes themselves. Concentrated energy beams sliced through the organic conduits, severing the connection between predator and prey. The lead Grimspawn vessel recoiled in what could only be described as surprise. Across their fleet, similar scenes played out as feeding attempts were systematically disrupted. But the real surprise came when the severed feeding tubes began to change. "The chemical cocktail is working," reported Dr. Zephyra, her gaseous form shimmering with excitement. "The contaminated feeding tubes are affecting their neural networks." The humans had spent hours analyzing samples of Grimspawn biomatter recovered from previous battles. They discovered that the feeding tubes weren't just mechanical devices. They were extensions of the creature's nervous systems. And like any biological system, they could be poisoned. But this wasn't a killing poison. It was something far more insidious. A neurochemical that induced aggression and territorial behavior. Within minutes, the effects became visible. Grimspawn vessels that had been working in perfect coordination began to jostle for position. Feeding tubes that had been sharing resources turned on each other, writhing and fighting like angry snakes. "Beautiful," General Vexthul growled appreciatively. "You've turned their own feeding behavior into a weapon against them." "That's just the appetizer," Chen replied. "Kim, initiate Phase 2. Across the system, what had appeared to be asteroids suddenly came to life. The Etherian ships phased into normal space, their translucent hulls shimmering as they materialized from higher dimensions. Each vessel carried a payload of the same neurochemical compounds, but in much higher concentrations. The Grimspawn fleet, already showing signs of internal conflict, suddenly found themselves under attack from an unexpected direction. But instead of trying to destroy the bioships, the Etherian vessels targeted their sensor arrays and communication organs, flooding them with the aggression-inducing chemicals. The effect was immediate and devastating. Grimspawn vessels that had been merely competitive became actively hostile toward each other. Bioships began attacking their own kind, feeding tubes turning into weapons as the fleet devolved into chaos. "Torres, are you getting this data?" Chen asked. "Recording everything," Torres confirmed. "Their communication frequencies are shifting into what can only be described as threat displays. They're not just fighting, they're establishing dominance hierarchies." Ambassador Krixtal watched in fascination as the seemingly unstoppable force tore itself apart. "How did you know this would work?" "Because we've seen it before," Chen replied. "On Earth, when predator populations get too concentrated, they start competing for resources. Add a little chemical encouragement, and that competition becomes warfare." But the humans weren't done. As the Grimspawn fleet continued its self-destructive spiral, the Allied forces moved to Phase 3. "All battle groups, execute flanking maneuver," Chen ordered. From concealed positions throughout the system, the combined fleet emerged, but these weren't the individual species vessels that had fled in panic from previous encounters. These were something entirely new. Hybrid ships that combined the best technologies from multiple civilizations. Thoraxian armor plating protected Viridian weapon systems. Crystalline shielding covered Etherian phase shift drives. Human tactical computers coordinated it all, turning 43 different military doctrines into a single devastating strategy. The attack was precisely timed to catch the Grimspawn at their most vulnerable moment. While they were distracted by their own internal conflicts, the Allied fleet struck at specific targets, not trying to destroy the bioships, but to capture them. "Boarding teams away," reported Kim as specially equipped shuttles launched toward the confused Grimspawn vessels. Each team consisted of specialists from multiple species, equipped with technology specifically designed to interface with biological systems. "You're trying to take them alive?" Dr. Zephyra asked, her form flickering with surprise. "Better than alive," Chen smiled. "We're going to recruit them." The boarding teams worked with surgical precision, targeting specific organs within the bioships. But instead of destroying them, they were implanting something. Control nodes developed from a combination of human cybernetics and crystalline neural interfacing technology. "The beauty of biological systems," explained Torres as she monitored the boarding operations, "is that they can be reprogrammed. We're not destroying their ships. We're teaching them to hunt different prey." Within hours, the first converted Grimspawn vessel began operating under Allied control. Its biosystems, still fully functional, now responded to commands from the hybrid fleet. But more importantly, it retained all of its original capabilities, including the ability to communicate with other Grimspawn. "Phase 4, Chen announced. "Let's see how they react to one of their own, telling them to back off." The converted bioship began transmitting on Grimspawn frequencies, but the message wasn't one of surrender or defeat. Instead, it was something far more primal, a territorial challenge that claimed this entire region of space as already occupied by superior predators. The response was immediate and exactly what the humans had predicted. The remaining Grimspawn vessels, already agitated and aggressive from the chemical conditioning, responded to the challenge with fury. But their attacks on the converted ship were met by the full force of the Allied fleet. "Now they're learning," General Vexthul observed with satisfaction. "Attack our territory, and you get hurt." The pattern repeated itself throughout the system. Converted Grimspawn ships, backed by Allied vessels, established territorial boundaries that the remaining bioships quickly learned to respect. Any attempt to cross those boundaries resulted in immediate retaliation, not destruction, but painful, expensive encounters that left the attackers weakened and confused. Classical conditioning on a fleet-scale level, Chen explained to the amazed representatives. Every time they try to feed in our territory, they get hurt. Eventually, they'll associate this region with pain and move on to easier hunting grounds. But the most brilliant part of the plan was yet to come. As the converted Grimspawn vessels integrated with the Allied fleet, they began to change the bioship's fundamental understanding of the galaxy. Instead of seeing every star system as potential feeding grounds, they started to recognize territory, boundaries, and the concept of defended space. They're learning to negotiate, Dr. Zafira reported, her voice filled with wonder. The converted ships are actually communicating with the Wild Ones, establishing protocols for resource sharing and territorial disputes. Over the following days, more Grimspawn vessels were converted, not through force, but through demonstration. When the wild bioships saw their converted kin thriving as part of the Allied fleet, receiving regular nutrition and protection, they began to approach voluntarily. Stockholm Syndrome on a galactic scale, Kim observed. They're starting to see us as pack leaders rather than prey. The transformation wasn't complete or universal. Many Grimspawn fleets remained hostile, continuing their destructive expansion into other regions of the galaxy. But in this sector, something unprecedented had occurred. A predator species had learned to coexist with its former prey. The best part, Chen explained during the celebration that followed, is that this is scalable. Every converted Grimspawn vessel becomes a teacher for others. Every successful defense creates a model that other species can follow. Ambassador Crixtall looked out at the mixed fleet now patrolling the system. Human vessels flying alongside Thoraxian battle cruisers, crystalline defense platforms working in concert with Etherian scouts, and scattered throughout them all, the converted Grimspawn bioships that had once been the galaxy's greatest terror. How long before the effect spreads? He asked. Based on Grimspawn communication patterns? Torres consulted her displays. We estimate that within 6 months, most of the galaxy will know that this region is defended. Within a year, they'll start avoiding us entirely unless they're looking to join the Alliance. You've created a protection racket, General Vex Thule rumbled with amusement. Pay your dues to the Alliance, and we keep the Grimspawn from eating you. More like a neighborhood watch program, Chen corrected, but with really big guns and the ability to convert apex predators into guard dogs. As the weeks passed, the success of the human strategy became undeniable. The Grimspawn threat, while not eliminated, had been contained and managed. More importantly, the crisis had created something that had never existed before in galactic history. A true multi-species alliance based on mutual cooperation rather than convenience. The humans had done more than save the galaxy from the Grimspawn. They'd shown 43 different civilizations that cooperation was possible, that their differences could be strengths rather than weaknesses, and that even the most terrifying predator could be tamed with the right approach. But perhaps most importantly, they'd proven that being human meant never accepting that something was impossible. When faced with an unstoppable force, they'd simply stopped trying to stop it and started trying to control it instead. And in the end, that made all the difference. The galaxy was no longer silent with fear. Now it hummed with the sounds of cooperation, innovation, and the confident chatter of species who knew they were no longer alone in the dark. The humans had arrived, and everything had changed. The Grimspawn were still out there. Still dangerous, still consuming worlds in distant sectors. But they were no longer unstoppable. They were no longer unknown. And they were no longer unafraid. Because now they knew that somewhere in the galaxy, there were beings who looked at apex predators and saw pets waiting to be trained. And that knowledge changed everything.